the role the lever-action rifle played in the American Civil War. Well, historians usually do not like the what-if scenarios, but we are usually asked why the entire US Army was not armed with the Henry rifle if they had such a devastating weapon on hand. Well, before answering that question, let's talk a bit about how the Henry rifles actually got to the battlefields, because that's an interesting story. Around 10,000 Henry rifles saw actions during the American Civil War, both on the Confederate and on the US side. On the US side, the Henry rifles arrived from two sources: government purchases and private acquisitions. Although it was never accepted officially for military service, there is at least one unit that was entirely armed with Henry rifles, based on direct orders to the New Haven Arms Company from the Ordnance Department. Just a month after the breakout of the Civil War in May 1861, Oliver Winchester visited Brigadier General James W. Ripley, Chief of Ordnance, to sell his product. But by that time, the Chief of Ordnance was not really interested in any kind of repeating breech-loading concept. He was quite challenged in supplying muzzleloaders to his troops. By that time, the company was able to produce 200 rifles a month, but according to Oliver Winchester, this could be doubled easily. Now, this letter was followed by official army trials in November 1861 by Colonel Charles P. Kingsbury, Chief of Ordnance of the Potomac Army, and Henry J. Hunt, the head of a military board. They wrote a favorable report about the rifle, praising its capabilities, its fast rate of fire, and when they submitted to Ripley, well, Ripley rejected it. This was very disappointing for Winchester, so he turned towards the Navy. Let's see the group of the Uberti rifle with black powder cartridge at 100 meters. And that's a good 100-meter group with the Henry rifle. 4 shots are within the size of a 10 ring, let's say a bit more than a 10 ring, which is 5-6 centimeters, which is quite good. And I have a flyer here. It's probably because of the cartridge or me or the rifle, I don't know. But still, if from 5 shots, 4 are in a size like this, and the rifle is good and the cartridge is good. And the rifle is good for hunting. I fired the front sight, so at 50 meters I have now around 8 to 7 centimeter high shot, which means that aiming to the center bottom of the black, I get my group, let's say, it's 3-4 centimeter high, which tells me that for hunting it's perfect. From 30 meter to 120, I'm sure it's right on target, and the group is good for that. And for target shooting at 50 meter, which will be a key task of this rifle, it is still okay. The rifle was put on trial again in May 1862 at the Washington Navy Yard, and the result was favorable again. One rifle was fired 1,040 times without any malfunction. Only some leading in the bore and falling that caused the problem, but in fact the rifle was working. But still, the Navy did not order from the rifle, just as the Army. So now the only chance that remained for Oliver Winchester is turning to the private sales, so he established a dealer network that could reach as many customers as possible. And in fact, vast majority of the Henry rifles were purchased from these private contractors, these private firearms dealers. throughout the Civil War. But there are some rare exceptions. One exception is the 1st Cavalry Regiment of the District of Columbia that received the permission to arm the entire troop with Henry rifles. So, in fact, Ripley ordered 1,731 pieces altogether from the New Haven Arms Company. From this amount, 1,100 was delivered throughout the course of the Civil War and the rest just after Appomattox. The cost of these rifles was $36 a piece. This was much less than on the open market, because on the open market you could buy them between $42 and $80, and they paid $13 for 1,000 cartridges. The first batch of rifles arrived with 48,000 cartridges. This image shows the officers of the 1st DC Cavalry. 240 Henrys were sent to them in early 1864. And when 8 companies of cavalry from Maine were added to the 1st DC, another 800 Henry rifles were shipped to them by the War Department. By that time, the Henry rifles were really popular on the open market, and in 1864 March, Oliver Winchester decided to give another try to the Army, so he submitted a 10-shot improved carbine for Army trials again. Now, this was a very unlucky test, because they fired 167 shots with the rifle, and during these 167 shots there were 3 malfunctions. A spring broke, there was even one cartridge bursting in the magazine, which was really disappointing. So General Ramsey received a report stating that the Henry rifle is just too delicate for the soldiers. These improved carbines were submitted for trials again in August 1864 in the Washington Arsenal, and these tests were a failure again. This was carried out with the stronger cartridges that I already mentioned to you. Well, some of the cartridges failed to extract, some fell apart on extractions, some misfired, you had to strike them multiple times with the hammer to fire. So this was a failure. It proved that this system at that state was not fit for military use. Due to these reports, no other orders arrived to the Winchester Company for Henry rifles up until the end of the Civil War. They delivered what they had on order, but no more. And these reports are the cause why the Army finally chose the Spencer for the cavalry. And the Spencer was probably much more favorable because of the slower rate of fire, which helped the ammunition consumption as well. Now we are stepping into real long-range shooting. 200 meters with black powder cartridge with the Uberti 1860 Henry rifle. And that is my first 200-meter group with the Henry rifle, with black powder cartridge of course, and I'm satisfied because the group is a 5 centimeter high group, which is very good. I had a strong crosswind, but I don't care about it, and I had to aim somewhere here at the bottom of the target, a bit to the left, because the bullet is at this distance is wandering to the right. So vast majority of the Henry rifles arrived to the troops through private purchases, and the price could be really high as $80, which was nearly double of the price as the normal retail price of a Henry rifle. The largest privately funded Henry regiment was the 7th Illinois Volunteer Regiment that purchased 500 pieces at a cost of $52.5 a piece. The second largest was the 66th Illinois Volunteer Regiment that purchased 220 pieces. A great help in financing these private purchases was the Veteran Volunteer Act of 1864 that offered a 30-day furlough for the veterans returning to service and also a $400 bounty that was equivalent of 3 years' salary. Now, that's a good amount of money to spend on Henry rifles. Probably this is the most known image about Union soldiers with Henry rifles. This shows the color bearers of the 7th Illinois Regiment. Illinois sent 6 regiments to the Union Army. The 7th purchased its Henrys individually, and I'm pretty sure that they were happy to spend that money well. Probably their most known engagement is the Battle of Altoona Pass, where the superior Confederate force of Major General Samuel G. French's division of 3,276 men attacked the Federal garrison of 976 troops defending the railroad cut in Altoona on the 4th October 1864. Just before the battle began, General John Crows received another 1,000 reinforcement, totaling his troops to 2,025, including around 300 soldiers from the 7th Illinois Volunteer Veteran Regiment armed with Henry rifles. The Union commander refused to surrender and decided to stand fast and hold the entrenchments. The battle was as bloody as a Civil War fight can be, resulting in the highest loss ratio on both sides. Firepower, partially supplied by the Henry rifles, were key element of the successful defense. The 7th expended 31,000 rounds of ammunition during this battle. Private Frank D. Orcutt, who purchased his Henry rifle in July or August 1864, remembered the ammo expenditure the following way. Have occurred the opportunity of an ocular demonstration of the effectiveness of the writer's firing, after fully 400 cartridges had been used without any perceptible results, besides burning his hands and exhausting and depressing him mentally and physically. The casualty rate of the Union forces reached 35%, while the Confederate side suffered 27%. A good proof that the defender always have an advantage that is significantly stronger if armed with faster firearms than the attacker. Let's talk about the Confederate Henrys. There are no official records of the Confederate government purchasing Henry from dealers or from the New Haven Arms Company, of course. But we definitely know that there were quite a few Henry rifles in Confederate service. They arrived from 2 sources. First of all, they could be privately purchased. It was possible. Second, they were war booties, and this was the largest number. Most of these rifles, or many of these rifles, are marked with the CSA letters. This is indicating, or this can indicate that the rifle was inspected in a Confederate arsenal, or the CS or the CSA letter could be also added by the soldier himself, who indicated that this rifle was fighting against the Union. The most important donor of Henry rifles to the Confederacy was, in fact, the U.S. 1st DC Cavalry that lost many hundreds of rifles in multiple engagements. Now, these rifles were mainly used for arming the 7th Virginia Cavalry. Many other Confederate units used the Henry rifle, but probably the most known is Jefferson Davis's Bodyguards. Now, this unit was set up in 1864, and it was set up from disabled-bodied men. Daily needed 1 commissioned officer, 2 non-commissioned officers, and 12 privates. It was not a big unit, but they were armed with Henry rifles. So there was a significant amount of Henry rifles on the Confederate side as well, but what was the exact number? I'm pretty sure that nobody knows it. The maximum length is limited by the carrier. Never exceed this, otherwise your rifle won't be able to fit the round in the chamber. Many believe that the muzzle-loading military rifle is responsible for changing the warfare when it was issued to every single troop of the army. I doubt this. It is not the accuracy, but the rate of fire that counts. In the middle of the 19th century, the tactical formations, the close combat tactical formations, were broken up because of the rate of fire of the breech-loading arms and the repeating arms. The high rate of fire dramatically increased the advantages of the breech-loader armed defender against the attacker. Just imagine the situation when the defenders are equipped with a breech-loading rifle or repeating rifle with high rate of fire, and they are attacked with soldiers with muzzle-loading guns. The attacker has to stop after each and every single shot to reload the gun, and that takes 20 to 30 seconds, usually in standing position. And this problem is more severe if the attacker is using any of the Napoleonic time attack formations like the attack column, like the deploying line, like the mess. Just position your soldiers armed with breech-loading repeaters in a well-protected position, occupy field fortifications, and with a handful of men you will be able to defend against a large number of enemies. Such event happened on August 24, 1864, when 7 soldiers of the 10th Michigan Cavalry Regiment were ordered to protect the McClellan Ford. Now, these guys, 7 riflemen, held a complete Confederate brigade for 3.5 hours, and the brigade was not able to cross the ford. They had to swim the river above and below the ford to be able to flank these 7 guys. And the Confederate general just could not understand how these 7 people could stop their brigade for 3.5 hours. And they even killed 40 of their men. The repeating rifle was an excellent tool for skirmishing. The open combat formations like the skirmish line allow the firing at will, allow using any position, allow using any cover. So this is just perfect for that concept. The muzzle-loading rifle is tricky to load in prone position or sitting or kneeling position. It is not impossible, but it is quite tricky. While loading the breech-loading rifle, you can still keep your eye on the enemy, every time. While skirmishing, the repeating rifle is also able to hide the real strengths of a unit. With being able to deliver a high rate of fire, multiply shots, 15 shots a minute, well, it is very hard to determine the exact number of soldiers in the skirmish line for the enemy. The Henry rifle is also a very suitable arm for suppressive fire or covering fire. It was the duty of the skirmish line to pin down the crew of artillery pieces or to fight enemy snipers. In these cases, the high rate of fire is a true advantage. The repeating rifle can also have an advantage while attacking in close combat formations like line or the attack column. In this case, the rifle can be fired while moving, so you don't really have to stop to reload the gun. In case of the muzzle loaders, you have to stop after every shot to reload it in 20 or 30 seconds. So you expose yourself to the enemy while just manipulating with your rifle. In case of the breech loader, you don't have to do that. But in fact, the contemporary tactics that were based on the old Napoleonic tactics, they did not really like that kind of firing. So they were focusing on firing large volleys instead of letting the soldiers to fire at will. So which means that in this case, most of the advantages of the rifle, the repeating rifle, are eliminated. The Henry was also suitable for small war actions, harassing the logistic routes of the enemy, carrying out raids, reconnaissance missions. They were also very suitable for that kind of concept that this rifle was invented for. Of course, in this case, when fighting the small war, when the small unit is detached from the main body of the army, and it is very few soldiers are operating in large areas, well, from a logistics point of view, this can be tricky because you cannot make cartridges or find cartridges in the field. You can reload them, but I don't know if you have ever found any accounts on reloading the rimfire cartridge during the Civil War. I have not found any, but if you have one, then please put it into the comment section. Let's see now how it can handle the 300-meter distance. 300. I love that. Ow, that's a miss. One more. Okay. So this was the second part of the Uberti review video. Ladies and gentlemen, please don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, share, switch on notifications. Please be a patron on Patreon. or on the History of Weapons and War platform. Ladies and gentlemen, up until next time, stay cool and keep your powder dry.